Happy Thanksgiving, everybody. I hope everyone is having a safe holiday. And I wanted to take this morning, I've been putting this off for a while, specifically so I could give it a lot of time and love, so that I could make this video and share some things before I got some work done. So today is one of the things that I am most thankful for, aside from everything else, you know, our health, our happiness, safety, security, and family and friends. But safe electricity is a big part of that for me. And you guys will know that because you've seen the saga that it's taken to get there. And now we have electricity that's, you know, buried underground. I've got my panel here. I've got my 2 shut-off panels, all that good stuff. So this video is going to be about what it was before that and how we got here. And I hope you'll bear with me and forgive me. I won't say that I've been dishonest, but I maybe haven't shared some of the details until I knew that I could get everything under control, and it's taken a long time to get there. So we'll talk about what future plans for power are and what the original electricity situation was for the house, and then what power was when I got the house and all of the concerns related to that. So I can't remember the date. I'm going to try and look it back up because I remember finding the article when power was first brought to Navarre County and it came to Corsicana, and then they brought it over here. It was very close to the time that the house was built, but if you look at the timeline, it looks like the house was built without electricity and then it was added shortly thereafter, which does make sense when you look at how some of the original fixtures were wired. So I'm not surprised to see that, but this would have been one of the most grand houses in town, so of course it wouldn't have been too long after they got power in the city that they would have wired this house up. Now of course they wouldn't have a million outlets like we do today and lights and things like that, but certainly they would have had power. Before that, they would have provided light through gas lighting, oil lamps, and candles. They would have provided heat through, of course, fires in the fireplace, wood stoves, things of that nature. So they weren't necessarily roughing it, but it was just a different form of energy that was provided. And then when the electricity was brought in, what I've noticed in the house was that some of that first electricity was knob and tube. And this is going to get to be a long video, so I won't show all of that and get into all the details, but I will show some photos. I have some previous videos that talk about finding knob and tube. Basically that was a thinner wire that was wrapped with a little bit of insulation, but frankly not enough. And then it went through these porcelain clamps that were the tube, the knob that basically nailed into like a stud or a joist or something like that. And that's what clamped those wires in place, held them safely and securely, and helped make those connections. Frankly, that is not the wiring that scared me, because if it's in good shape and generally protected, not damaged, it still can function. The concept is correct, and I think people probably give it a little bit more love because they are so concerned about it, so it gets more attention. But that was not what was the concern in this particular house. Fast forward to about the middle of the last century. They were looking for more cost-effective options, and I've got this very sweet kitty who's decided that she needs to say hello. They were looking for more cost-effective options, and so instead of the copper wiring, they were starting to use aluminum wiring. And one of the issues with that was you had basically a compatibility problem. Materials would expand and contract at different rates, and the expansion and some of the issues with just 2 different metals corroding created issues and led to fires in the home. I have not found any of that in this house, but that doesn't mean it didn't happen. But again, that was not the thing that really concerned me because of course I didn't see a whole bunch of it. And I think probably in this house, because it was one of the early adopters of power, they probably just didn't add as much. By then it already had what it needed and everybody was kind of happy with it. So you're very sweet. Yes. So the one thing that did concern me was the state of the house when I got it. It's actually the power that was put in probably from the 80s through the 2000s. And That was rough. That was very concerning. There were a lot of junctions that were made in concealed spaces, which could potentially cause a fire or an issue. If an issue happened in that junction, we weren't going to see it because we didn't even know it existed. And, so if those wires get loose and now we have a fire, how would you even know to look out for that? That was a concern. The installation was done in quite an unsafe manner. A lot of wires were just shoved through and completely stripped of all of their protection. Just thought I'd show you the kitty fight that's going on. And so that was really what was of concern. Now, of course, all of that happened once we started doing the demolition, but I didn't even need all that to know I needed to be worried to begin with. So when we purchased the house, if you'll look here, so these white wires that you see, the black ones, I think most of the black ones are what is kind of left of my original power that was brought to the house before they cut it back when it was still overhead. The only wire that's hanging right now overhead is my internet, and that will be gone soon as well. But all of the spaghetti of wiring, that is a problem. That was, if that's any indication of how they do wiring, we know we've got some issues going forward. So if you did have to run electrical wire on the outside of the house, you would definitely want to run it through some conduit to make sure that you didn't damage it or it wasn't exposed to UV or anything like that. Clearly they didn't care to do that. They just kind of thought that'll do. And for example, if we take a step further back here and you look at this bedroom, you see those two little wires that run straight up. They actually go through a hole in the side of the attic wall. No sealant, nothing like that. Those are actually interior wires, so they're not even supposed to be exposed to UV. And so exactly what we thought would happen happened. Over time, that encasement, the plastic that's supposed to protect it, was exposed, became brittle. It broke off, water got in, it shorted out that particular circuit, caused damage. Thank goodness. We were still discovering what was connected to what, and sometimes that wasn't even done correctly. So at that point, everything was actually on surge protection, so that was good. We protected the electronics, but of course it takes out the surge protector. So yeah, this is what was going on when we got the house, and you can imagine you want to be really careful. If this is what you're seeing, imagine what you're not seeing. Okay, so the next thing that was really obvious, but I opted not to talk about until today, is the actual panels themselves. So I have 4 panels here in the house. We're gonna see all of them, and these are the old panels. Obviously I have 2 new panels, but these are all the old ones. The power is cut to them, so I'm gonna touch them all day long today, but not get electrocuted. Yeah, so this is one of the panels that's majorly of concern. So the power is supplied to the house. It comes down. This is not necessarily the main supply panel to the house. That's fun. There's actually a wire that runs underneath the house that doesn't go through anything until it gets to the other panel, which always scared me to crawl underneath. Not necessarily being next to a wire is an issue, but it's more that it could have been nicked or something like that, and I wouldn't know it until I was electrocuted. So that was not good. But you can see what we did here. This is not how you're supposed to do it, so I'm just gonna point that out now. This was a very temporary quick fix and should never be done. But essentially what we did was we went in and we took out as many circuits as possible as quickly as possible. And the thought was, if you have less risk of electricity just running through some wire, there's less risk that you're going to cut a wire by accident. Something's going to short out, something's going to start a fire. So this was about mitigating as much risk as possible as quickly as possible. A lot of you guys know that I travel for a living, or except for in 2020, but I've only gone on, I think, 3 business trips this year. But usually I travel for a living, and it was such a serious situation that I would get up at 4:30 in the morning to go to the airport. I would shut this panel off before I left, and then come back and I would turn it on, just so I could get a couple of lights on upstairs until we could get this situation figured out. So this is not an ideal situation, but this is what the level that we went to keep everything as reasonably safe as possible. The next thing is that you can't really see the label on this particular panel, but we'll look at another one. This is a Federal Pacific electric panel, and I'm not going to claim to be an expert in electrical wiring. I'm not an electrician. I have one of those and he's great, but I will say do some research on that if you have one of these. I'll talk about what I know, and if it's wrong, I apologize. I'm open to other information as well, as long as it's well documented. So this is a Federal Pacific electric panel, which was basically one of the common options in suburban areas in the middle of the last century. It was I won't say cheaper, but it actually ended up being cheaper. But it was supposed to be the more cost-effective option at the time. So some of the other major panel manufacturers are Square D, which is what I have, or General Electric, GE. Those are still common today and you still see them. But these particular panels have a history, and we'll talk about it in a second. And I have 2 of them. So one of the other things that we did, I'm sitting here playing with this item here. This is a copper grounding rod. It is not as far in the ground as it needs to be, but it's as quickly as we could get it in the ground. We could not find an indication that the wiring was grounded, which is basically you want to make sure that all those wires in the house are tied back and have a direct path to the ground so it's not through you and your house. So this was the quickest thing that we could do to help make that happen. There actually are 2 rods here in the house now. They're underneath each one of these shut-off panels, and they're so far down you can't see them. So, well, actually, yeah, here is one of them. And of course I need to work on repairing a whole bunch of this, but anyway, so let's go in the house and talk a little bit more about the FPE panels. I apologize that I haven't been able to talk about those before, but I frankly didn't want everybody to know how bad it was before. I just wanted to get that problem solved, and it took quite a bit to be able to do it, to find people that wanted to do the work, to be home for that work to happen safely, to be prepared and have everything cleaned out. So it took a while, and it meant that my lifestyle was very different for quite some time. It still is, but it's so much better than it was. So just a quick pause in the porch to really appreciate the spaghetti. So we saw what was going on the outside. This was all hidden within the walls and the ceiling. And I will say there's not necessarily a rule that it needs to be neat and safe and secure, but I will totally judge you. If you go on a job site that's just a total mess and there are, Coke bottles and sandwich wrappers all over the place, odds are that those people don't necessarily take the most care in installing your particular construction. Same thing here. So if you see wiring that is just kind of sloppily done and haphazard and it's not labeled, they might actually be cutting corners somewhere else. So it is important to have good, neat, clean work. Now, my guys, we'll be in securing everything. We're in the middle of the work right now, though, so it's not going to happen just yet. All right, so as I told you, underneath the house, there was a big, huge supply wire that comes up here. So that was already of concern. That was directly under the most recent kitchen that was installed. Here is my next FPE panel, and I'm going to open that up so you can see it. So one of the labels you want to look for is Stab Lock, which was kind of like their claim to fame, marketing, gimmicking kind of a thing. And to describe what happened, I obviously don't have all of the facts, and I think nobody does. They just kind of quit looking for everything, but there is an organization called United Underwriters Laboratories, UL, and it's one of the organizations that does third-party independent testing on all of our construction materials, or most of them, and even all of those materials assembled into one wall or one roof or something like that. For instance, this hot water heater will have a UL listing on it. I believe, I haven't found it, but it'll have one. The materials that I work with every day. So if you guys don't know what I do for a living, I don't like to talk about it, but I work with building materials as well. I might be working with them on fire testing for insulation and air barriers and studs and veneers and things like that to make a fire rated wall, or I might be working on a testing for a roof assembly to prove that it's not going to lift up off of the roof in a certain wind speed. And likewise, they had that for these panels. You can actually see the UL number here. So after all of this started happening, UL did actually pull all of their listings for these panels. At least that's what I've learned. And I won't say that they cheated UL in the UL testing, but somewhere along the way, they got the UL listing, and then a lot of fires started happening in homes across America. And initially it wasn't attributed to these panels, because who would think that it was the panel? I mean, the whole purpose of the panel is safety, and it was UL listed. And so I think it took a while for those two things to be connected. But there are kind of two issues from what I've learned. And again, not an expert on this, I'm just sharing what I know. So let's say that you have a house full of teenage girls, and we're all blow drying our hair at the same time. And we happen to have plugged in those blow dryers on the same circuit. Blow dryers kind of pull up a good amount of electricity. So everybody's blow drying their hair, and all of a sudden all the power cuts off. So normally what would happen is this panel on that circuit, the circuit breaker would say, oh, wait a second, that's too much power going through there, and it would trip. And then you would come downstairs, everybody's blow dryer would be off, you would flip the breaker, and then you would proceed on, right? And likely what would happen is somebody would realize, hey, too much power going through here. Okay, Sally and Sue, you guys continue to blow dry, but maybe Jessica and Jane, you're going to wait a little bit, right? So that's typically what would happen. In this particular type of a panel, the concern was that about 50% of the time, and this is all on statistics that I haven't been able to get my hands on the actual study to see if it was independent, but anyways, about 50% of the time, the breakers would not do that, even though they're supposed to. So what could potentially happen is you've got way too much electricity going through one wire. So here's a wire, right? This is kind of a modern one because it's got 3 in it. It would start to melt the encasing and potentially could start a fire in a house. So that was the first thing. The second thing was that the bus bar, which is located in behind here, I can't really show you without taking everything off, and I don't have a screwdriver. So, I mean, I do have a screwdriver. This house is full of them, but anyways, so the bus bar in behind it wouldn't necessarily perform its job either. So I don't want to get too far into this, but basically these weren't reliable, and they were attributed to causing fires, people dying in those fires, millions of dollars worth of loss, and they just don't have really good research to kind of document all of that. So you probably don't want that in your new modern house, right? Also, funny side note, when they put in the hot water heater, it didn't fit quite well to be able to open, so they just bent up the edge so all the bugs could get in. So this panel feeds into the next panel, which is a sub panel. This is more for just looking at the size of the breakers, more for like your appliances, washers and dryers, and not Zeus, and hot water heaters, things like that. Although the hot water heater's gas right now, but it's not going to be. So obviously we did the same thing here. We took out as many of the circuits as we could, and that's why you see all of this abandoned spaghetti-like wire. But we didn't start to pull all of that wire really for two reasons. One of them, you can, if you're going to the same location, leaving that wire in and kind of what we would call ring in string. So you've got like a string that takes you where you want to go with your new wire is kind of nice. So we're leaving that in place so we can just pull it through. But the other issue was really more out of safety. It's like a gun, you know, being a Texan. So we want to treat all guns like they're loaded. Even if you know for sure there are no bullets in them and all of that, treat it like it's loaded. Same thing here with electrical wiring. Treat it like it has it has electricity to it. And in this case, when we were taking all of that out, there shouldn't have been electricity to these wires, but we had two that touched and sparked even though they weren't connected to anything. So what that tells me is, again, our genius do-it-yourselfer went through and at some point connected one back on itself, which also could indicate another reason why we would have had overloaded circuits. If we've got electricity going through, you know, two different circuits, that is a huge problem too, because it wouldn't necessarily trip. So all of that to say, if you can't trust your electricity, your lifestyle has to be a little bit different until you can get that problem fixed, which is exactly what it's been for me for the last couple of years. If I knew that my wires had the tendency to overheat and I wouldn't necessarily trip it for my safety, I better make darn sure that I'm not putting a lot of electricity through it. And so in this case, what that means is no motors. So I didn't use a microwave. I didn't use a refrigerator. I didn't use a freezer. I didn't use a hot water heater. I didn't use an air conditioner. I didn't use a heater. It has been glamping for 3 years now, which is a little longer than I would have liked. I would do it again in a heartbeat. Only if it were me. I would never recommend that to anybody else. If I had small children or something like that, this is not how you want to do things. But this is what I wanted to do to make sure that I wasn't overextending myself. So there are no additional loans that were taken out to do all of that. And we'll talk about that in another video. I also wanted to be here to make sure that everything was safe. Now, granted, I've had access to all of those things, but just not here, for the sake of making sure that this house was safe. There were 22 smoke detectors and carbon monoxide detectors in the house. They were all Wi-Fi enabled, so even if I was not home, I was able to know immediately if something was triggered. And we did have a couple of instances where, God bless the sheriff's department, the fire department, where something was triggered and they did come over and just check it out and make sure everything was okay. But by and large, I think those particular very extreme measures were totally worth it. And that's probably why the house is still here. So we are on to a new day, and I'm really excited that we'll never have to go back to that. Okay, so here is the last panel, and this one I'm really excited about. So you're going to see it's very different from the others, and that is because it's not a breaker box, it's a fuse panel. And so this is the original panel that was here in the house. Again, I don't know exactly off the top of my head when power came to Curran's, but it was very soon after the house was built. And so this would have been the original, and I just love it, you guys. So look at all of the font that they chose. Just how neat it is. It just kind of has that cool industrial look to it. So the difference between those breakers is that we have what's called the fuse, and it looks like a little light bulb, a little glass light bulb. And this basically makes that connection for the electrical current in your circuit. So you would screw that in, and these would break too. You can actually still get them at our local Home Depot, by the way. Or I think some of our hardware stores may still have them too. And then if you wanted to turn that off, you would just flip this so that that connection between these two terminals wasn't made anymore. And then you would turn your circuit back on. So the lights in the house, when I got the house, still ran through this panel. I didn't share that with you guys. I'm sorry. So this was basically fed off of one of the panels over there that I just showed you. So it was just a huge menagerie of wires within the wall and things that got rerouted 3 or 4 times and a big hot mess. this panel means a lot. This in and of itself was a challenge because initially one of the electricians said I absolutely could not keep this. And now I was very clear, we're not going to run electricity through it anymore. Although there are still homes here in the county that use these. And like I said, I think I probably wouldn't have as much of a concern about knob and tube as I would with some of the do-it-yourself stuff that's been done recently. But anyways, he said I couldn't keep this because of code compliance or something. And I was like, but it's basically a piece of art in the side of the wall. There's no power going to it or anything. And all of my, the official and my new electrician, they have no issue with it. So really grateful I get to keep that. Another thing to be grateful for. Obviously, we're going to clean it up and make it look really nice. Funny side note, all of the risk that's ever been in this house. When Mom lived here, the bathroom that was here is the bathroom that she used the most often. And there was a bathtub that sat right here. So I'm so grateful that Mom never reached over and decided to start playing with those things while she was in the bathtub, because things would have been different if that's the case. But so that is one challenge that I was able to overcome. Second one, in keeping that panel, would have been really nice to have light switches right here. One way to do that would be to have an actual external conduit. So it'd be like a metal pipe that comes up, and then you would have your light switch installed here. That's not so pretty. So my electricians are so nice. We put it over here, kind of in a quick design change, which means just as you come in the door, it's going to be right here on the right-hand side. I think I talked about that in a previous video. Ultimately, it doesn't matter too much. I hardly have even touched this. I usually just talk to my Alexa and she handles it for me. So, in fact, she just triggered when I said that. So anyways, I don't think that'll be too much of an issue, but if I ever do need the switch, it's right there. Not a big deal. So I hope you guys will forgive me for not sharing all of those details 3 years ago when I got the house. But I think you can understand why I just really didn't want to incite any additional panic. It meant that I had to make a lot of sacrifices, but I think it was something I was totally willing to do. I went in with eyes wide open knowing that, and hopefully it will be a fun story to tell. But I am so excited now because I have my 2 refrigerators on the other side of this door that are going to go in. My stove is going to go in here pretty soon. I got heater ready to go in upstairs. About to get my hot water heater. I just have to do a little bit more demo and get everything prepped. I even found a plumber for that. So, oh man, life is just looking up, and I can't be more grateful, honestly, for all the people that have helped me out, all of the patients, all of the sweethearts here in Kearns that have even offered, if you want to come over and take a shower, you can do that at our place. It was so nice of everyone. So hopefully I can return that favor soon. But right now, the thing I'm dying to do the most, after of course spending time with family on Thanksgiving Day, is pulling out some of these awful wires so I never have to look at them again. So you guys have a terrific Thanksgiving from my family to yours, and we will talk soon.